Welcome to the second episode of our series Easily Explained, guys. Today I'm here, Chris, at your service, and you're gonna be learning how to make a global state using the useReducer and useContext hook.
And why are we using useReducer and context together in the first place? Can't we just learn them separately? No, because these two go hand in hand in creating a global static. The context makes a state global while the useReducer hook allows us to make changes in it. The most common use case example of a global static is in user authentication, and in this video we're going to be using the same example as well.
Let's say that you have gazillion amount of components in the app of your mother's fashion designing store, and you gotta see whether a user is authenticated or not. So basically, for example, in component 1 you set up a variable which says that this user is authenticated, and if you want to access that same variable in component 11, then boy, you are cooked. So what we gotta do is that we gotta create a global static or variable that is accessible throughout this entire app. And to begin with, I only have this simple login page with the email form and with the email input and the password out input, and these only accept the certain values, and if I submit it, it says login successful, and if I change the password, it says incorrect credentials. So we're going to work around it, and we will make the whole functionalities of authentication using this form. So to follow the first step, we're going inside the source folder, and inside the source folder a separate folder by the name of context will be made. Now you may ask, why are we creating a separate folder for this? Because we gotta keep the code clean, bros. And you know that the cleanliness of your code is equivalent to your performance in bed, and to be honest, I'm pretty good at sleeping, so that's a win-win. And as we're creating a global constant or state for the user authentication, it will be named auth auth cannot type context.js. There we go. Now to create a context that is globally available for all the components, I'm first gonna import the create context from React, which will allow us to create such a context. So I will make a constant which will be named authentication context, because we are making for the authentication purposes, which will be equal to create context. Now, what does this mean? This means that an a context is made by the name of auth context. As simple as that. Creating context isn't all what we want. We also want it to be globally accessible in all components. So to do that, I'm first gonna make a function will be auth context provider, right? And inside this function, I want to unwrap the app. And I cannot do it here because, as we can clearly see, that the app is already unwrapped inside the React.strict mode, and it is rendering here. So I cannot copy it and paste it here. It will cause many errors. So I need to find a way around this. To do it, I'm first gonna return a component which will be auth context dot provide, right? And inside this, somehow need to find a way to wrap the app within these two tags. And doing it is pretty simple. What I actually want to do is actually export default. And what am I gonna export? The auth context provider, and I'm gonna enclose it within brackets because it isn't the only thing that I want to export. I also want to export auth context so that I can use it in other components as well. But right now I need to use it in the index. In the index, auth context provider, right? It is being unwrapped. I have to import it in auth context provider from slash context, inside the context the auth context. Very nice. Now that I have wrapped the app within useContext provider, a prop will automatically be sent in the useContext provider by the name of children, which will contain the children of it. So the children of useContext provider right now is app. So I'm gonna go to useContext, and as I mentioned earlier, children prop with will be passed here. So the children will contain the app, and I'm gonna print the app here. Pretty simple, right? There we go. Now making it globally accessible isn't all what I want. I also want a value and function for changing the value of auth context, because for example I have the authentication value of the user which is logged in, for example, and I want it to be logged out when the user clicks on the logout button. So not only do I want the value of it, I also want function that would be responsible for changing its value. And for that very purpose, I'm going to use the useReducer hook. So the useReducer hook returns two values. First is state, which is the actual value, and other is dispatch, which is the function that is responsible for the change in state, and which will be equal to useReducer. And in useReducer, I'm going to pass two values. First value will be the reducer function. This function basically runs in accordance to the dispatch function, and which brings changes into the state actually. For example, if I did anything in the dispatch, it will run the reducer, and the reducer will simply change the state. And I'm gonna make the reducer function in a bit, but before that, I'm gonna write the default value of the state, which will be user null, because in a website the user isn't logged in default. With that done, I first want to take some time to explain you how the dispatch and reducer really work. So let's say I'm gonna comment it out because I'm just writing it to explain to you guys. For example, I can access the dispatch through auth context. Not right now, but for example in the future we will be able to. So inside the login page, okay, what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna write dispatch. I'm gonna run the dispatch function, and inside I'm going to pass in values, and first value will be type. What kind of type of action I'm going to perform right now? So I'm going to be performing login. It is a string, and it is up to you whatever you name it, so better name it appropriately as I have. And the next thing will be payload. Payload will be the data that you want inserted inside the state. So it will be user, let's say. Now that I have used this, the reducer function is going to run. So I have to define the reducer function, which user equals to this and that. And inside the reducer, I need to pass two arguments. So the first argument state, which will give us the value of state, current value of state, and the next step will be our action. So basically, whatever the things that we've passed here, these things will be stored inside the action here when the reducer is run by the dispatch. Alright, so if I'm gonna see what kind of action is the user trying to perform. If action dot type equals to login. Alright, so the user basically wants to log in. So when the user wants to log in, I'm gonna return is the value of the user, which will be equal to payload that is passed along the action, which is equal to the user that we're gonna eventually get when we're at the login page. But for now, you guys may have understood what's the relationship between dispatch and reducer. The dispatch basically runs the reducer and passes two arguments usually. First argument is login, which will tell us what kind of action is being performed, and next up is the payload of the action. Payload meaning that the value that we want to change inside that state. So here it is. Now obviously the login isn't only the action type that we're going to perform here, we will also perform the logout. So I'm going to write else if the user passes the value of logout, like this using type, then what will happen is that I'm gonna return the user. No. Now the thing that I'm returning out here using the reducer will be a saved state, and the default value will be replaced. So now I need to somehow find a way to insert the value of state and dispatch inside this auth context so that these two are globally accessible in all the components. And to do that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go down here, auth context dot provider element. I'm going to pass a value which will be equal to the state and the dispatch. Really nice. Now we can access these two values everywhere we want. Now with that done, the real question is that how actually am I going to receive or access the value of state and dispatch in any other component? Actually, it is really easy, and for that I'm going to make a custom hook. Why am I going to make a custom hook? Of course, to make our code clean, and I told you the reason earlier. Now inside this hook folder, I'm gonna make a file, a custom hook actually, which will be named useContext.js. Oops.js. Now inside this custom hook, I'm gonna write sc so that I get basic structure, and inside I'm gonna write use auth context. Alright, and I'm gonna return nothing for right now. And to actually receive the value of our auth context, we will need to use the useContext hook. Okay, so const value equals to, I'm going to use context, okay, this hook, and inside I'm going to pass the value of the context, which value I need to receive. So I'm going to pass auth context. Beautifully done. And this value will contain the dispatch and also state. I can also do it like this, patch, and stuff like that, but it's pretty easy if we do it directly like this. Turn value, and there we go. The hook is being made for us to easily extract the values from auth context, so the next thing we will do is actually extract the values. And I'm gonna go to app.js. You can go to whatever component you want, and inside here, what am I going to do is that constant value, which will be equal to the value returned by our hook, which is use auth context. Beautiful. Now we have the value of the dispatch and also the state stored within the value, and I'm gonna console.log it up here. Alright, nice. Now we will check it. A quick correction out here to be made is that you don't need the default to be here. You just need to export so that it exports two of these values. Alright, now I'm gonna look at the console, whether it is controlled or not. So in the console, we can clearly see that there is an object out here. And if I click on it, yes, there is the dispatch and the state. Now you can check it in any component in your website. These two will be accessible by using the hook of use auth context. Now ignore this error as I ignore the dying screeches of kids in my basement. As I mentioned, you can use the value in whichever component you want. So I have used it in the login page where it is going to be used. So if the credentials are matched, I've only alerted, and if it didn't, I've also alerted that it is incorrect. What I'm gonna actually replace it by is value. No, the first thing will be that I will destructure it. So instead of value, I will write state and dispatch so that I can use them separately. And first I'm going to run the dispatch function because we're making a change in the value of state, which will be action. Now first we're going to define the action. So type of the action is of course login. And secondly, the payload. Payload will be equal to email and I'm gonna bracket it up. Nicely done. So now in theory, if the user is logged in, then we can utilize the value of email and password in whichever component we want. So first of all, I will console.log the value of state to see if it is true or not. As I've, changed the value of state using dispatch, I want to see if the value is really changed or not. Now, if I click on this button, the dispatch function will invoke the reducer function, which will change the value of our user. So I'm going to click it, and we can see that the user is still null. It is because the value of our state is being consoled before the dispatch function is run, or we can say that the value of state hasn't yet changed. And if I click it again, it is showing us the previous value, the previous when I had clicked it, and which is email and password. So we have successfully logged in the user, and what I'm going to do next is pasting it up here so that we can clearly see whether the user is logged in or logged not. And I will also make a button of logout so that we can log out the user subsequently. Now to print the email of the user, I need to go down here, and inside a div will be created, and its value is state. It is our global state, and inside the state there is a object by the name of user. Inside it, the email is stored when the user is logged in. Now, of course, I only want it to be printed if the state.user is not null. On default it is null, so on default nothing will be stored. And if it is not null, meaning that the user is logged in, then I only want the email to be printed. The credentials are inserted, and I'm gonna click on submit, and nicely done, fellas. We successfully have James at example.com email printed on our document, and it is only printed when the user is logged in. Now what I actually want to achieve is that when the user is logged in, all of this disappears and we have James at example.com and logout button out here. And doing that is easier said than done. So first thing I have done is that I have, pulled it down inside the form so that it really appears inside the form. And the rest of the code up until here will be wrapped inside a singular div. Okay, inside this div, rest of the code is here, and wrapping it up with a bracket, and it should be only shown when state.user is null. And when the state.user is null, it means that the user isn't logged in. And there we go. The next thing we need is a button. So I'm going to create a button real quick. Button will be equals log out, and on click it will handle our click. Before handling the click event, we will first see whether it is working or not. And on the submit button we click, and the result we see, and the happy we become. Okay, now to handle the logout, I'm first gonna write down event of on click. In case if the user click, we will handle log right, and the logout function will be made up here, which will be const logout. Not logout actually, we will write handle logout equal to this, and here what I'm gonna do is that I will call our friend dispatch, and inside I'm gonna write the type logout. Alright, and the logout won't be directly written, it will be written within brushes. Now there will be no payload sent it because we have written in the code that if the type is logout, then you need to null the value of the user. So when the value of the user is null, we will again see our form, and this email will be disappeared. Now let's check it out. Okay, so I put in the credentials, I click on submit, okay, and then I choose to log out, and boom, you can see that the email and password form again popped out. But this whole functionality is still incompleted. Why, you may ask? Because when I click on the submit, okay, the user is logged in, really cool, but when I refresh it, the value of our state becomes null again, because we know that in any application, in any static application, when you reload, the constants and the variables are reinitialized, so the value which was initially null is again turned to null. So I need to find a way to actually store the value inside a local storage and fetch it in from the local storage whenever the user clicks on reload. Setting the value of the state inside the local storage is easier than spreading jam around the web, because what we really gotta do is that when the user is successfully logged in, when the credentials eventually match, what we want to do is that local storage, right, set item. So I am setting an item inside our local storage, and I'm gonna name it user because it's obviously user data, and then I'm gonna send the actual data, and the actual data is your email and password out here, and these are object, and I want them to be converted into JSON. So I'm gonna use JSON.stringify so that they're converted to JSON, and I'm gonna copy it from here and then paste it here. Nicely done. Now let's check it out. That was pretty easy actually, and the only thing that's left to do is that I'm going to click on submit, and after clicking on submit, the output is shown, the user is logged in, and I'm going to go to the application tab, and inside the application tab there is this space by the name of local storage, and inside the local storage there is a file, separate file dedicated for my application, and inside it there is a key user, and inside the value of email and password is successfully stored. Now what really remains for us to do is that we're going to go back to our code, and we're going to receive these values, and then we're going to assign it back to our state whenever we reload the page, and then we're done. Okay, in React, whenever we want to run a function on load, we will use the use effect hook. So use effect, and it will give us a callback function with a nice and a body. So inside this body, I'm gonna do the actual work, and the actual work is nothing but const user equals to, now the value that I'm getting from the local storage, which I will get by using local storage dot get item, and then the key that I have set by the name of user, and this is coming as JSON, and I don't want it to be coming as JSON. I want it to come up as an object, as JavaScript object. So I'm gonna JSON parse it. Just like I had JSON stringified it when I had sent, I have to like parse it when I receive it. So I have parsed it. Now I'm gonna check if the user, if there is some value in the user, and if there is, then I'm gonna assign it to our static global variable by using our dispatch function. Inside this dispatch function, the type will be login. Nice. And it is string, remember? So I'm gonna write it in braces. And then payload. The payload obviously will be the data that is coming from our local storage, which is user. And another thing that needs to be done is that when the user logs out, we need to clean up the value from the local storage as well. So local storage dot remove item, and which item should be removed? The item of the key of user. There we have it, fellas. We have completed all the code. Now we will see if it worked in accordance to our need. I think I have missed the empty bracket out here so that it only runs when the page is reloaded. As you can see right off the bat, it is logged in because the data is still inside the local storage. No matter how many times do I reload it, it is still gonna show us the email and the logout button. I'm gonna reload it again. It is again showing it. Once I log out it, won't show it again. And that was pretty much it for the video, fellas. The link to the GitHub repository of the source code is given in the description if you want to check it out. And if you don't know how to import a project from GitHub, considering checking out our first episode of the series Easily Explained. It was Quickside, your service, fellas. Now signing out.